You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dimitri Vitsa. I'm also the founder and CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the PR firm that specializes in music, technology, music innovation, all sorts of stuff in the music industry. Hey, when we launched the Music Tectonics conference and podcast, one thing that surprised me was that the musical instrument community, physical and virtual, quickly became huge supporters. It shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was the marking point of a convergence between the developers and manufacturers of music making tools and the traditional record industry and everything in between. I already was going to conferences like South by Southwest, which we are just back from a few weeks ago, and Music Biz, which we'll be attending in Nashville in May. And by the way, please stay tuned to future episodes of Music Tectonics to find out about the UMG Startup Bootcamp happening there. That's going to be super cool. And I started going to the NAMM show, which is a cacophony of musicians demoing the latest gear from all the instrument manufacturers, plus demos of software, apps, and more. We'll be there today at Media Day and throughout the week at NAMM. And I love this intersection between gear and the record industry. Music Tectonics is where people are making tools for making music, selling those tools and instruments, where people are making music and where people are recording that music and then marketing that music to super fans and beyond, and so much more. Last week, we had Laura Davidson from Shure Microphones on, and today we widen out even further by bringing on Heather Farr Edwards, Brand and Communications Director at Reverb, the marketplace where buyers and sellers of music gear find each other and help each other fulfill their dreams. Welcome to Music Tectonics, Heather.
Thank you. What a great intro. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you. We've never really had a conversation, and one of the things I love about this podcast is sometimes the first real deep, fun conversation I have with someone is on record for our whole network. And Reverb has such an interesting window into what is going on in the gear market, which is why I'm excited to have you. You're one of the top sellers of music gear. You work with well-known artists to help them sell their collections of instruments, and you produce a lot of content to help musicians figure out what equipment to choose and how to use it. Obviously, it's not just well-known artists, it's everyone that's playing music or has gear they want to exchange or sell. What's the current pulse of the music gear market in 2023 as we head into NAMM?
Yeah, so every year I take a look at kind of the landscape and what's going on in the market, and I think the good news is people are still making music. And I think if we can, start from there each year, we're in a good spot. I think, even as the macroeconomic situation changes, which it, does and has frequently over the last couple of years, at a breakneck pace in the last 3 or 4 years. People continue to play, but really what changes from year to year is more so the type of gear that they use to make that music. So I think I would boil down kind of what's happening in the industry right now really into two main things. So one, prices of music gear across the industry are generally coming down. So we're not quite where we were pre-pandemic, but we're getting there. And a big part of that is, there was a huge demand for instruments during the pandemic, which contributed to inventory shortages. And now that supply is starting to catch up. Related, and second, people are really feeling the impact of inflation and the cost of living. So again, that doesn't mean people aren't playing or aren't looking for gear. It just means that they're looking for deals or they're looking for a good value. And so, one thing we're really focused on at Reverb right now is helping buyers find the gear that's on the site that fits within their budget, whatever that looks like. And then as a marketplace, on the flip side of that, finding new ways to help sellers get their deals in front of those buyers. So luckily for musicians on Reverb, there's lots of ways to find affordable gear. We have a watch list feature where you can essentially just save the gear that you're looking for and get notified specifically if it drops in price. You can make offers and negotiate, which is just kind of a normal part of buying and selling music gear. You can buy used gear or B-stock gear, which are just kind of everyday ways to get a good deal. And then, lots of people sell gear that they're not using, and then immediately turn around and turn that into another purchase. So for us right now, affordability is really top of mind. It's top of mind for a lot of players right now. But luckily, there's lots of ways to keep making music without spending too much money.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, every time I think about Reverb or talk to somebody at Reverb, I get into this world of understanding kind of how to optimize e-commerce and this exchange. And one of the things I love about Reverb is I think, and I've bought stuff from Reverb, it feels a little bit like you're connecting people to each other. Like, even though it's totally a very above board, like, purchase, like just like you do at any other store or whatever, it feels a little bit more personal somehow. I don't know why. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about some of those tools that help you, like the watch lists. And I know Reverb's big on like analytics for the folks that are selling stuff as well to help them optimize sales too. It's just super interesting how technology can be used that way. And I appreciate you sort of like giving us some big picture, like post pandemic, there was this explosion and the impact that it had on supply and demand, and even just sort of that contextual comment, like we're hoping that prices continue to get reasonable again because of, I think, those shortages and things. I mean, I don't know, without revealing anything too proprietary, is there a way to kind of express where the gear market is in this year leading into 2023 in terms of sales?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the good news is that people are making music, so they are buying music gear. And, so the shifts around the type of gear that they're buying more so aligns to kind of where people are at. So, to maybe contextualize that a little bit further, take the pandemic as an example. So, if you were to take a look at what was happening on Reverb during, say, like the last couple of months of 2020, you would see that searches for recording gear were up significantly. Makes sense, right? People weren't going into the studio. They were recording at home. They were, we all saw those virtual collaborations with all of the squares of heads, like the Brady Bunch. Those all required a lot of gear to make those happen. At the same time, we saw an increase in searches for just generally kind of gear that lends itself to playing in a cramped living space, like a small flat in London, where I live. So acoustic instruments, small keyboards, all of those, we were seeing increases in searches at the time. And also saw some signals that led us to believe that people were, picking up instruments maybe for the first time or for the first time in a long time. We saw a lot of new buyers, and they were all kind of purchasing things that we could see beginners using, low barrier to entry, acoustic guitars, ukuleles, beginner synthesizers. Fast forward to today, concerts are back, which is great news. School music programs are back into full swing. So I think some of those categories that the industry as a whole saw dipping during the pandemic are now starting to level back out. Things like live audio, certainly things like band and orchestra gear. And as far as Reverb specifically, I can kind of broadly say that our sellers have saw sort of consistent demand throughout that time, like leading up all the way through to where we are right now. So again, musicians are continuing to play, but we have seen that shift in finding gear that right now fits within their budget, whether that means they're maybe opting for a used piece of gear rather than a new piece of gear, or deciding to buy a pedal instead of a brand new guitar because that's a little bit more of an affordable way to change up your sound. So yeah, I mean, we're continuing to see consistent demand. I think the shifts just kind of follow what's happening in the world right now.
That's pretty cool. So it's almost like you saw this burst of interest in either acquiring gear to use at home because they couldn't go out, or a lot of new instruments or new players like picking up the ukulele for the first time. But what you're seeing now, it sounds like, if I've got this right, is that people are now like buying the next piece of gear to go with whatever it was, or the next several. I mean, I know you probably have some gearheads that are ridiculous. It's probably really fun for your data analytics folks to be like, check out the top 100 buyers. They're insane.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
know,
it is an addictive hobby or lifestyle in terms of, like we used to get I used to have people asking all the time, like, are you don't do you hate music making apps, and like do you hate people making music on their phone? And I'm like, no, because someone who's making music on their phone is then going to, maybe they stop, and that's fine. There are tons of beginners who stop and don't continue, but for every person that doesn't continue, they're on their phone, and then they're like, oh, maybe I'll just try, something on my
maybe
computer, and then maybe I'll buy just like an audio interface, and like before you know it, they've got, a desk full of gear. So yeah, it's definitely sort of a one thing leads to the other situation.
super fun. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I'd like to ask you about maybe a few products that are now starting to grow in popularity. We'll be right back.
Shaylee here. Are you ready for the Music Tectonics Conference ticket drop? A limited number of super early bird badges go on sale April 24th, 2023. We're organizing 3 amazing days in Santa Monica, California, October 24th to 26th. Your badge gets you into high-energy panels, insightful keynotes, a startup pitch competition, innovative exhibitors, networking, and more. Don't miss out on the best price for the best music tech event of the year. Sign up to get notified when super early bird badges go live at musictectonics.com/conference. Now back to the show.
All right, we are back with Heather Farr Edwards from Reverb. Hey, Heather, I wanted to ask you, what are maybe 2 or 3 products that have like gained in popularity over the past few months? Why do you think they've become popular? And maybe you can tell us what's interesting about each of those instruments.
Yeah, sure. So I think I can talk through maybe some kind of broader trends and then give you some examples that fit within there. So keyboards and synthesizers in general, super popular on Reverb, especially over the past couple of years. And I think taking a look at some of the, consistent top seller synths on Reverb, a theme is definitely portability, approachability, and affordability. So a few examples: the Teenage Engineering OP1, consistent bestseller, super powerful, tons of features, lots of sounds, all packed into this, portable device. And I think a big part of its appeal is the design is super approachable, great for beginners, but experienced players, love it as well. Similar to that is the Korg Micro Korg, compact, easy to program. So, pretty approachable regardless of what level you're at, and affordable too. And I mean, I think it's interesting if you take a look at the top 10 bestsellers from the last like 90 days or so on Reverb, all but 2 of those are synths that are $500 or less. So definitely in a super approachable range. Another trend, which we were just kind of talking about, is home recording. And I think that is, even now that we're out of the pandemic, I think that is, here to stay. So during the pandemic, we saw, you mentioned it was our data analytics team. I think that they really, I think they really do love their jobs, because it is certainly interesting to connect those dots. So we noticed during the pandemic that guitarists and drummers, so people who have purchased guitar related or drum related gear, were purchasing for the first time mics, audio interfaces, other recording equipment. So, we can infer that they were recording at home either out of necessity, they couldn't go into the studio, or experimenting with home recording because they're like, well, I have all of this time on my hands, so what else am I going to do? Either way, though, I think we'll continue to see this trend, just because these players have now experienced how easy it is, how approachable it is, how relatively affordable it is. So some consistent bestsellers kind of within that trend are the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, interface, as well as the Shure SM67 mic, both just, well known for their versatility. And then the last thing I would bring up, which I think maybe is maybe a little bit more anecdotal, is artist signature gear, which is just kind of consistently popular. So, everyone kind of has players that they look up to, and buying an artist signature gear can, it can either help you sound like that artist or not, or at the very least, it gives you an option to buy a piece of gear that has some unique specs. So I'll give you two examples that are kind of on the two different ends of that spectrum. So on the one side, you have Jay Mascis just released the Electro Harmonics Ram's Head Big Muff Pi, which is an example, I would say, of a pedal that really does get you close to that Dinosaur Jr. sound. On the other side of that, you have something like the Double Down, which was designed by Third Man Hardware and MXR. And the pedal isn't, meant to give you the quote unquote Jack White sound, but rather it was something that was created to kind of solve a problem that Jack White himself had. And so his kind of, description of that pedal is that he wants, people to be able to use it to sound like themselves rather than to sound like him. So, either way, a really unique way, I think, to be kind of, close to your artists, either in sound or like in solidarity.
I love it. It's also like the ultimate artist merch, right?
Oh,
Like you could buy a
absolutely.
t-shirt, or you could buy something that'll help you play along or make that sound, or even just evolve and be creative from there, but feel like you're a part of their artist story. I love those
Yeah.
examples. Hey, audience out there, if you're listening, check out this. Heather Farr Edwards is killing it here, telling us like context we've never heard on the podcast. You're probably over there washing the dishes and now you're clapping your hands because this is an amazing conversation. Hey, I've always been curious about how new technology leads to new sounds, genres, scenes, and vice versa. What are some emerging genres that are either created as a result of specific gear or required a different approach to using gear? I know this is kind of your head of brand and communications there. It might be a crazy question to ask, but I love these insights. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this question. And man, there's so many pathways we could go down with this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, to trace a pretty large subsection of popular music and kind of how it has evolved over time, you really don't need to look any farther than the effects pedal. So if you consider, like the signature riff on Rolling Stones, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, or the wah sound that was made popular by Jimi Hendrix, or all of the sounds from the classic rock era, funk records from the 1970s, Van Halen record. I'm naming, a multitude of kind of different sounds here. Britpop, grunge, noise rock. Shoegaze is literally a genre that is named because of the players looking down at their feet, during the concerts. And the underlying sort of story here, although they're all different, is the effects pedals that help them make those sounds. And I think for, an artist who is in a creative rut, or like we were talking about before, doesn't really have a lot of money to change up their sound, an effects pedal offers this huge world of opportunity in terms of changing up that sound. And I will say, if you are kind of interested in these types of storylines, I have to recommend the Pedal Movie if you haven't checked it out. It is a feature-length documentary that Reverb created a couple of years ago that tells sort of this exact story of effects and how they shaped music. It's fascinating. Obviously, the ties to popular music and kind of how that came about is sort of what draws you in. But then I think once you get into the story, you realize it also created this whole sort of community of small businesses and players who were creating these tools that then their heroes went on to use and make these, sort of iconic sounds. So yeah, definitely check it out. Reverb.com/the pedal movie if that's interesting. it's a long one, but I mean, it's a it's a big story. So
Sounds. I mean, it's right in line with what I'm curious about. So I love that reference. Go watch the movie.
mhm.
Right. So Reverb's a two-sided marketplace. You have your sellers and your buyers. Who are some of the most interesting sellers at Reverb, and why are they interesting?
Yeah. So overall on the site, we have a huge range of sellers. So the top music gear retailers in the world, local and small businesses, brands, small gear builders, and then you have, individuals. So that could range from you or I, or probably more excitingly, some of the bigger musical acts in the world. And so those shops are always fun to work on and promote. So a couple of recent examples: Nancy Wilson of Heart recently sold just a ton of rare vintage prototype guitars that she's played, all over the world. Modest Mouse recently sold a huge range of gear from basically all of their studio albums and tours. And in January, Polo and Pan launched a shop. And, I think especially for artists like Polo and Pan, who are really known for experimenting and kind of changing up their sound frequently, opening up a Reverb shop, lets them get some of the gear that they're no longer using out into the world to fans or people who are actually going to be putting it to good use. And, I think you mentioned this earlier, but like, what better way to get closer to one of your favorite artists than to literally own, such a iconic piece of their story?
Yeah, that's super cool. Huh? Do you ever get to hear about like an artist that's like doing a big sale because they're gonna like work on an album and they're kind of like building up funds to pay for the next thing, or you don't really get to hear that kind of data?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably assume most folks who are who are selling are doing so that they can then take that money and turn it into new gear. But I think more often than not, sort of the story that we hear from artists is like, hey, I loved this when I was using it. I got a lot of amazing songs out of it. Now it's sitting in the corner of my studio, it's sitting in the corner of my storage, collecting dust, and I just want to give it to somebody who's going to play it. So, and in those instances, I mean, they're often not, if you look at the prices of this gear, you would expect that the prices are 20-40% higher than what they would be, but most artists are selling these for market value because they truly just, these were very important tools to them, and now they want to give it to somebody else who's gonna take it and turn it into their own magic.
Nice. What about buyers? Are there some interesting story on that buyer side?
Well, we definitely have some interesting stories on the buyer side. I can't get into too many specifics in terms of, I think a lot of people who are buying on Reverb maybe have friends or family that they don't want to know how much they're spending on the site. But I'll tell you one of my favorite buyer stories. There was a session drummer who was based out in LA, and ever since he was 9 years old, he's loved two things, and that is drumming and the Smashing Pumpkins. And a few years back, he was online researching, how to get the drum sound from the Smashing Pumpkins album Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. He's researching, and he comes across the Reverb shop of the drummer, Jimmy Chamberlain, who is selling that exact drum kit that he used to make that album. I mean, can you imagine?
Wow.
You're on there to get like some tips, and then you end up with the drum kit in your cart. So he
Oh my
buys
god.
it, and 2 weeks later, kit arrives. Jimmy had sent along his phone number. They exchanged texts.
Oh,
They've kept in
incredible.
touch. He's been to, a couple of shows as their guest. And you were talking earlier just about the personal nature of what's getting bought and sold. I mean, we have so many of these stories where And so, sometimes it's a well-known artist, and sometimes it's someone who's just, letting the other person know what the guitar, what the synthesizer meant to them. It is a very personal exchange. And when we sell this gear from well-known players, of course it's fun and it's a great story, but I love to think about the person on the other end who like has just acquired this amazing connection piece to one of their heroes.
As somebody who has done this, has bought some instruments. Now, I haven't connected with an artist that I'm in love with through the instrument, through the instrument exchange, but just like the magic of knowing you're about to unleash some creativity, but then to add in this direct connection. Again, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, Reverb feels like it's a personal connection, and you kind of want to know a little bit about the person who just sold it to you, regardless of whether they're famous or not, because you're sort of like, well, you're obviously. And one of the things I love about Reverb is how there's scoring and details about the quality of what you're getting, and some I don't know if it's guarantees, but really through the rating system you can tell kind of what you're getting into. But then you wonder, like, if it's a well played instrument, you're like, wow, I wonder what all has been done. Like how does the legacy continue in your hands? Which is super interesting. So let's widen out again. What's one thing that people don't often realize about Reverb? I mean, a lot of people, they don't have a lot of the context we're talking about today. They're just like, it's the best place for them to find this gear, or, to find out more information about gear, so forth. Are there any lesser known but important facts you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I love this question. And, I think that most people probably know or realize or assume that, as a company, we have a lot of musicians on staff. I mean, we sell music gear, so it makes sense, right, that we would have some musicians working at Reverb. But I think what a lot of people maybe don't realize is that we're equally a tech company. So, there are a lot of smart engineers, developers, product designers that put a lot of hard work into making it easy to buy and sell on Reverb. Marketplaces, just in general, are super complex. If you consider, as an example, just the many variations of any one piece of gear that exists. I mean, any single piece of gear can vary by year, where it was made, the color, the model, the condition it's in. And then you combine that with the fact that each person who's putting this up on the site is an individual. So there's a lot of room for, error there. And, it could really lead to a disaster from like a search functionality standpoint. But we have a whole team that's, dedicated to making sure that when you list something, it is going to get in front of the person who's looking for it. And it sounds really simple, but there's a lot of complexities in there that make it, really not so simple. And, then you've got features like our price guide, which takes all the sales data that we have and turns it into kind of useful information so that you can, better understand what you're buying or selling. Lots of smart minds behind just making sure that data is correct and that it's a helpful tool. So I think, most people often probably don't realize that it really takes this kind of perfect mix of music gear industry understanding and tech magic to make Reverb an easy place to buy and sell. And, everything from how we keep the site secure to some of the new features that we build all kind of benefit from this mix.
That is really interesting. Again, like, to hear the context of what's behind that experience of actually being a buyer or a seller is super interesting. It just gets my brain going about how amazing a job Reverb has done with the user experience. Super fun. Well, Heather, put on your seatbelt because it's time to get sci-fi. All right. Most episodes, we ask this question. Help us fast forward 5 to 10 years from today with your wildest ideas of what we might see in music making. What is the future for music gear?
Yeah. So I think that the future of music gear will kind of wholly take into consideration the fact that, the boundaries between sort of gear categories and musical identities continues to blur. I mean, we've, alluded to some of this throughout this conversation, but, guitarists are recording music at home. DJs are using drum machines to make beats. People who learned how to make music on their phones or their computers are sort of rediscovering the guitar in a new way. Effects pedals that we talked about earlier are no longer just something that guitarists use. And so I think really what we're moving towards is hybrid instruments and workflows. So companies like Ableton, Native Instruments, and more are creating, products that combine sort of hands-on playing with that computer or software piece. And I know this is supposed to be future looking, but I mean, some of the most successful pedal builders right now too are already starting to recognize that, modern musicians are becoming, less and less instrument agnostic. So brands like Chase Bliss, Walrus Audio, EQD, Eventide, Strymon, and Maris are, building pedals that sound just as good paired with a synth or a drum machine, or even, a harp, as they are with the guitar. So I think that, the future of music gear is hybrid.
I love it. It's like we went to kind of from the recording side, this mashup of genres and styles, and now you're talking about this mashup of instruments and gear. And I'm sure I'd love that you are optimistic and positive about software and apps as an entry point for folks as well. And we'll continue to see some interesting mashups between those things. In fact, at NAMM, at the Triple G booth with Music Tectonics, which is, I believe, booth number 10105, Endless, which is a software app for making music, this kind of iterative, loopy music stuff, is bringing their beat machine. It's a full-size arcade cabinet that looks like an old Pac-Man machine, but it's a beat machine, and it's connected to the cloud too. So that whole mashup, not only of genre, style, gear, this type of instrumentalist using a different type of gear or mixing up some acoustic instrument with an electric thing, will continue to evolve, but also this software hardware component as well, where you'll see these new form factors that maybe wouldn't have worked before this cloud-based stuff started to happen. So I love how you're thinking about it, Heather. You know what? We have to take one more quick break. I've got a really important announcement, but when we come back, one of the things we love to do is expand our network. So we'll be looking for some thought leaders, some instrument companies we should be looking for when we come back.
Hey, Greg Stein here, founding partner and CEO of Triple G Ventures. We're thrilled to be teaming up with Music Tectonics to bring the most creative, techie, and musical inventions to the NAMM show in Anaheim. Make our #InnovateAtNAMM experience your first stop on the show floor to check out the mind-blowing new tech, tools, and toys from Equi, Synthogy, Mixed, Sonic Mind, InSounds, Black BT, Riffler, Artiphon, Mitchell Acoustics, ASI Audio by Sensophonics, Soundbrenner, Endless, and so many more. Don't miss demos with Dream Theater's own Grammy award-winning keyboardist and multi-instrumentalist Jordan Rudess, live podcast recordings with Music Tectonics' own Dimitri Vista, a chance to play Endless' new groundbreaking beat-making arcade machine, and so much more cool stuff. Yup, it's all happening at the Anaheim Convention Center. #InnovateAtNAMM is on the map at booth 10105. Search for Triple G in the NAMM Show Plus app to check out the schedule of all of our amazing demos and giveaways too. And now, back to the show.
All right, we're back. And Heather, like I said, we always like to expand our network at Music Tectonics and help listeners find each other. Let's start with companies. What are 2 to 3 instrument manufacturers that our listeners should get on their radar and check out?
So I will, maybe I'll do you one better here, because I don't think I could pick just 2 or 3. We recently launched a campaign called Unmanned Mission, where we partnered with a band out of Chicago called Neptune's Core to perform using exclusively instruments and gear that were built by women. So they used an amp built by Third Power Amps, effects by Heather Brown Electronicals, a Tunatone guitar. Literally every piece of this setup was from
So
a
cool.
woman builder. So I would definitely encourage listeners to check out the campaign. We have, linked at the bottom information for all of the builders. It's over a dozen, and add them to your watch list.
Love it. Awesome. So what about thought leaders? Are there any particular people in the music instrument space that our listeners should be looking for their podcast interviews, their panels, or their writing, or just their social following?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are, really interested in digging deep into what's going on in the musical instrument industry, the sort of definitive source for that is the Music Trades. It's run by Brian and Paul Majeski, whose family have been in this industry and run the Music Trades for now 3 generations. So they put out quarterly reports on what's going on in the industry at large, and they run a ton of surveys where they're speaking with the brands and the manufacturers themselves. Beyond that, I think my team would be upset with me if I didn't plug our own editorial team. So the news section of Reverb is just constantly updated with the latest releases and deep dives into gear history, and a lot of times just cool things that we find on the site. And then finally, there is a podcast called Revoicing the Future, which is run by the women of NAMM. And that features interviews with female leaders talking about just their experience in the musical instrument industry. So I think that is one to definitely check out as well.
Those are great. Nobody's ever mentioned those. So I love this. I love this process of having thought leaders like you on the podcast, and then kind of paying it forward with shouting out other folks. Music Trades looks like it's musictrades.com. I think I've got that correct. Super happy to have that shout out, as well as the other ones you mentioned there. Super cool. And of course the Reverb editorial team is awesome. I think everyone who plays music has to eventually figure out something thanks to that team. So definitely shout out to them. All right. So NAMM is kicking off this week. What does Reverb have in store for NAMM, and what other events or activations should we check out there?
Yeah. So we will be at booth 5420. So definitely stop by and check out some of the gear that's been released and promoted on the site over the past year. So things like the J Mascis pedal that I mentioned before. You can also learn all about vertical video and TikTok from our head of social media at the NAMM Idea Center. That's on Friday at 11. And on Thursday at 1, our CMO is moderating a panel on actionable tips to incorporate diversity into your hiring culture and marketing. So that is, I'd consider that one a can't miss. And then outside of that, I really have to plug the She Rocks Awards. I have went every year that I've been at NAMM, and always a really just uplifting event. And this year we're going to be presenting an award to British singer-songwriter and influencer Mary Spender. So she will be there as well. So yeah, those are kind of the keys.
Oh my gosh, Heather, we've covered so much. I just imagine that as we launch this podcast, people are going to be traveling to NAMM listening to it. This is going to get them ready to go. But I can't believe we haven't had you on the show before. We'll definitely have you on again. We got to get you in the mix and keep learning from you. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Heather Farr Edwards with Reverb. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know you can dig deeper into all our episodes with the show notes at musictectonics.com? While you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference, sign up for our newsletter to get updates, or get the Music Tectonics app for music tech news. Everything we do explores seismic shifts that shake up music and technology the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and find me, Dimitri Vitsa, if you can spell it, on LinkedIn. Bye-bye!
You're listening to Music Tectonics.